Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar by the Rashram School of Public Leadership on a very important and interesting topic, which is going through all our minds that what will happen to India's economy, what role will India play in the future, and to discuss Atmanirbhar Bharat and India's journey towards self-reliance. We have with us a very special speaker, Professor Mukul, a name that needs no introduction, a former professor at the National University of Singapore at their Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. A very accomplished scholar. His research focus is on fiscal reforms, India's economic policies, pension reforms. Widely published author, has written several books, has written several articles. He has, as a consultant, worked with multilateral organizations, including the World Bank, the IMF, the Asia Development Bank, OECD, World Health Organization, to name a few. In India, he has consulted government of Gujarat. Recently, was the chairman of the Haryana State Finance Commission. And we are honored to have his support at Rashram as a visiting faculty. So Professor Asher, it's great to have you here. Thank you so much for your time. And now what we'll do is I'll request you to begin with your keynote address, and then Kisle from our side, who is a senior manager at the Strategic and Foreign Relations practice, will be moderating the discussions and taking some questions with you. Professor Asher, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me begin by first thanking the Rashram School of Public Leadership for organizing this webinar. One of the good parts of being an academic is that the academic keeps on getting older, but a lot of the audiences are young, and that keeps me young as I interact with the young people and get to learn about their aspirations, their ideas, and their thinking. Now, let me first begin with the sort of status report on how India is doing on managing COVID-19 virus. Some call it a Wuhan, China virus because it originated there. Now, what are the kind of statistics that we have? We have managed overall the virus situation reasonably well, barring some exceptions. Let me give only one or two statistics because all of you will be following them. Now, a lot of time the publicity is given to the number of cases. The gross cases are not very useful way that a statistician will try to interpret the numbers. To do that, we need to look at the what are the cases per 1 million population, and what are the deaths per million population. So in particular, we also look at the active cases, which is the gross cases minus recovery. Today's newspapers say that for the first time, our recovery cases are larger than the active cases, which is a very positive sign. Now, India being very heterogeneous, our performance, just one data on death rates, is also quite diverse. The lowest per million population death is in Assam, 0.08. The highest is Delhi, which is 46.7. And all India is 5.45. Global is close to uh, close to 490. So you can see that the overall we seem to have done managed well, but it is a very uncertain virus that can have a second inning as well. And so we need to be very careful. The other high states, Maharashtra death rate is 25.7 and Gujarat is 20.0. So we can see from 0.08 to 46 in Delhi, capital of the country, is something that gives us some worry, because Delhi and Mumbai are our two key cities that are not doing as well as one would like. Now, having looked at the basic data, we know that the COVID-19 virus and associated global changes are going to make it a different world going forward, which will need to be managed. What are some of the changes disruptions that we are likely to see? Samir Saran and Akhil Dev in Economic Times from ORF, they have argued that there will be three major changes. One is the weaponization of economics and trade. And this is a trend that we see among our friends and well-wishers, or at least those with we have a meeting of interests, and our adversaries with whom we don't. So how do we weaponize and manage weaponization of economics and trade? This is something new, and that is an art that we will have to learn, to which we have not been as adept, which is what they're saying. Second is that the measurement of national power will now be based on the ability to control global digital flows comprising technology, information, human capital, and finance. And we are present globally in all these areas, but within the country, we have not leveraged them as much as we could. So how do we become an active player rather than a passive recipient of these is going to be the second factor. This implies that the old tools and thinking are going to be less effective. Old globalization characteristics will change. Efforts to try to bring them back are not likely to be as effective, and we will need to work, and that's where I will focus as to how India is trying to respond in an innovative way to revive not just macroeconomy, but to bring about socio-economic transformation. India is the only major country that has tied its response to COVID-19 virus with structural reforms, with transformation. Almost all of them have been just fiscal, monetary, and others, and we need to understand this better. One of the manifestations, well, one of the changes that's going to occur is that there are efforts underway to try to reduce over-reliance on inputs, intermediate inputs, on final demand, on technology, on financial flows, on one country. In this case, it happens to be China. And there are going to be efforts to try to reduce the risk of over-dependence on one country. That doesn't mean China will not continue to play a major role in the global economy. China has a lot of strengths, and they will need to be utilized for the better governed global economy. One of the manifestations of this is that we are now seeing talk from that G7 countries or group be transformed into G11 with the addition of India, Russia, South Korea, and Australia. Now let's see how this goes, but this, as a digression, also provides a good opportunity for India to push for the Security Council seat, though how the UN itself will evolve is going to be a very dynamic situation. Okay. Now, economic policy making is a process, not an event. Our culture and thinking has become very instantaneous. You do this and something comes out. Put the money in the vending machine and whatever you want comes out. Economic policy making doesn't happen that way. It's a process, not an event. We need to keep that in mind because a lot of people are, in our response, just focus on the INR 20 trillion, about 10% of GDP package that has been announced recently, forgetting what was done in the very recent past and what is continuing to be done and done outside of that 20 trillion. Secondly, the results of economic policy are not instantaneous. There are broadly two types of policies. One is that those which has got the short-term costs, but the medium to long-term benefit. And medium to long-term can be 5 to 30 years. Okay? So that's the patience that is needed. And that's one of the things that teaches you as a public policy analyst is to be patient and not be impatient to say, hey, I said this, it's a good thing, why isn't it being done? So public policy impact, short run benefit, long-term cost. Now, what was the good example in India's economic policy of that? Bank nationalization. The bank nationalization in '69, when it occurred, a lot of people were very happy and they thought that that was a thing that will allow financial inclusion to occur. We know it didn't happen, and it took the Jan-Dhan accounts and technology, others, to really push between 2014 and 2019 the financial inclusion. There are other type of policies where there are short-term costs, but medium to long-term benefits. Now, we have experienced that in 2014 to 19 period or 20 period. One has been demonetization. The other has been GST. And the third, still in the process, is lockdown. These have got definitely short-term cost, but they've got medium and long-term benefits that we need to keep in mind. Uh, I will leave at that just as a background, because in analyzing policies, it's important to, to have analytical perspective. And if you don't have good analytical perspective, the more brilliant you are, because your worldview is incorrect, the more damage that you can do. Now, before coming back to the Indian policies, let's look at what globally the forecasts are of the COVID-19, because India is a very highly integrated economy with the rest of the world. I'll give you some uh, examples of that very soon. But let's look at what is being uh, projected. And we should understand all the projections right now are very uncertain, because these are very difficult times to forecast. But let's look at what they are saying. IMF's World Economic Outlook in April 2020 said that the world in 2019 grew at 2.9, and advanced economy at 1.7, and the emerging at 3.7, while India 4.2. But in 2020, world is -3, advanced -6.1, emerging markets -1, and India plus 1.9. That was in the April 2020. Since then, things have changed. Others have projected some different sets of figures. We see World Bank on June 8th projecting world GDP at -5.2, India at -3.2. Okay, so it's still marginally better than the world. OECD Outlook, which has just been published, global economy -6 in 2020, plus 5.2 in 2021, India -3.7 in 20, and plus 7.9 in 2021. So you can see the vast difference, but we're still doing better than the global average. They have an equally possible scenario if there is a second round of virus that may come, when they project the world to go down by 7.6, and the increase in the next year only 2.8. For India, it will be -7.3 plus 8.1. So there are a lot of uncertainty. Let's leave it at that we should not give too much credence to the overall GDP numbers right now. This is a very difficult time to project. What we need to do is to understand that whether we are laying at the same time micro foundations and doing reforms, which are going to give us solid foundation for growth as the demand revives. So now we turn to the India's response. By the way, I mentioned about the bank nationalization. In this connection, it is important to mention the base cause of our non-performing assets of the banks and the distress that we have been having and the challenge we have been having in reforming the banking sector. The root cause is as follows. In the first 60 years of India's independence, the bank loans, total bank loans in full 60 years were 18 lakh crore rupees. So 18 trillion rupees. Between 2008 and 2014, before just the NDA government was entrusted with the governance responsibility in 2014, the bank loans went from 18 lakh crore to 52 lakh crore, 6 years. So you can see that when the bank loans are growing so rapidly, quality can't be good. And we know a lot of I don't want to go into the evidence about telephone banking and others. All of you are aware of those. But that's the root cause that we are still trying to correct. Indeed, Prime Minister had said that in 2014, they did not publish the white paper on government finances and the economy because that could have reduced confidence in India significantly. So they looked at national interest, not political interest, and they carried on. They have been criticized for it, but I think they did the right thing. Okay. Now, let's look at our response. Our response, as I said, most people remember 20 trillion rupees, about 10% of GDP. And those who can't tell what is a revenue deficit, what is a primary deficit, what is public debt, public liabilities, contingent liabilities, a lot of them become fiscal experts overnight and try to comment on how much is the fiscal stimulus that has been provided, as if fiscal side is the only side. We know there is a fiscal side, there is a monetary side, there is a regulatory side, which impacts on the compliance cost and the cost of doing business. And there are the other types of policy and the environment, the attitude and the mindset, the behavioral changes that are relevant. Let me, I'm going to use the data from the IMF's policy tracker, which you can Google, and if you say IMF policy tracker, they will give you stimulus packages, fiscal, monetary, exchange rate, all of that, of 193 countries. So you can compare. And I'm taking some of my statements from Surajit Balla, who is India's IMF executive director for India and for Bangladesh and other countries. Now let's see what he's saying. He's saying that PM Modi has used COVID crisis to reorient India towards reform, long awaited that were needed, and moving India to a long awaited destiny. Now let's start with what did India do? One of the big reforms which has gone unnoticed is that in September 2019, India reduced corporate tax rates, which are now globally competitive, which have improved the corporate bottom lines quite drastically and allowed that money, if they wish, for capex and other uh, purposes. What was the change? We reduced corporate tax rate from 30 to 22%. At the same time, moved away with all the incentives and exemptions. I should put my personal experience here. I chair a publicly listed company uh, based in Mumbai with about turnover of 3,500 crores, exports of 500 crores. We were given option when this came, should we continue to get fiscal incentives, R&D, others, or should we go toward a clean rate, which is lower? It took, I'm chairman of the board. It took us 10 minutes to decide we should go for a clean rate, no incentives. We have saved this year 25 crores. Our bottom line is bigger by 25 crores. Is that not a stimulus? In how much of the discussion is discounted as a stimulus? And in the same package, for the new manufacturing, the rate is 15%. So for manufacturing. So we started actually outside. This is what I meant by process. Don't look at one event and a televised speech and try to get everything from there. Keep on studying what has been done before, what's being thought about, what's being done. Okay. Now, when we look at the package in the newspapers and others, you see people saying, oh, India's fiscal stimulus is 0.8%, 1%, and so on. It is too low, and so on. Now, let's see what IMF and Surjit's summary, and I read it as well. I come to the same numbers as Surjit does from the IMF. What number does it come? He says that India's package in terms of the fiscal side is at least 3.5% of GDP. You can add 0.5% of GDP for states to borrow additional, some with conditions for national priorities, such as DISCOM, privatization of DISCOMs or reform of DISCOMs, using one nation, one ration card scheme, and things like that, which marry or which combine the stimulus with much needed reforms and use of technology to deliver services and reduce leakages. That's what so additional 0.5% for states to borrow. So that's 4% of GDP. Support for MSMEs, medium and small, micro, small and medium enterprises, is 2.7% of GDP. At least 2% is in the form of 100% credit guarantees and equity infusion. Among India's comparators, India can't compare with countries that has got tax to GDP ratio of 35% on the average as in OECD. India's total tax to GDP ratio for the center is around 10%. For the states, it is around 9%. So 19% roughly is India's tax to GDP ratios. India's expenditure is around 30%. States spend more as share of expenditure and have more tax revenue after constitutionally mandated finance commission devolvement than the center does. So we should be looking at the states as well. How much are they doing? So if you don't add and keep on looking at 20 lakh and say how much is fiscal and so on, you don't understand public financial management, because you are leaving out the largest segment of the public finance sector in India, which are the states. So the states need to take more responsibility. Some states are doing stimulus, and all of that has to be added. When you do all that, we'll come close to 5% of GDP. So that's not small. Among the comparators, only Brazil with 8% and Peru with 7% are going to exceed India. We should also note that OECD has projected that in 2020-21, India's fiscal deficit will be between 8.2 to 8.9% of GDP. Our debt, public sector debt, is 70% of GDP. And our budget, which is cash budget, doesn't allow us to look at the contingent liabilities and the deficit on an accrual basis, which is higher. In addition, we should also look at large public sector enterprises, which have done their own stimulus. We also have on the one other big stimulus outside of the package, which is the National Infrastructure Fund. The National Infrastructure Fund report has projected that we will have, just 1 second as to, let me find the numbers, but it's a fairly large number.
1 lakh crore.
Yeah, it is 102 trillion. Yeah, right. 102 trillion. Thank you very much. 102 trillion rupees, which is outside. And that's going to happen between 20 and 25. So we are, and that's infrastructure, which we are laying the foundations for future growth supply side for. And that gets me to the concept of demand. Lot of talk in the newspapers and elsewhere about, oh, demand side is low. But what is the demand side? We should not be looking at the demand side only of the consumption of final goods and services by households. That's about 60% of GDP, true. But when there is an investment done, there is an investment demand. You build road, don't you have demand for roads, for cement, for machinery, for labor, for others, and so on. And that has got its multiplier effects. So we have an investment demand, we have government demand, we have a net export demand. So we need to look at demand from all the aspects of national income accounting and not just the consumption side. Okay, so there have been various packages, and I won't go into the details. But if you notice the finance minister's May 13 to 17 packages, they include reforming of state enterprises, of discoms, which have always been a big worry. Today's paper, Financial Express, says that the center plans to have union territory discoms privatized by 2021. So it's not very far. So that And a lot of the packages have been given on the basis of reforms. There is going to be the bank financial sector will be combined, private sector will be allowed. We are going to develop coal market. Can those of people like me who grew up in the 40s and 50s can never think of India having a coal market, in India having an electricity market where you can buy and sell electricity. So these are all new concepts. That's why the transformation is coming. Okay. One data useful, the corporate tax reduction. The government has come out with the number that the corporate tax cut in 2019-20 alone cost 1.45 trillion INR. That's not small. Okay, so when we can put numbers now to the corporate tax rate reduction. The personal exemption up to 5 lakh, that cost 23,000 crore. That's the number the government has given. All these are stimulus, and they have to be considered to be part of that. Okay. Now, let me get to the two very key concepts of the package, or what I have called strategic ideas. Strategic ideas are Atmanirbhar Bharat and Be Vocal for Local, okay, BVFL. Both these are absolutely essential, and they are very India context specific in order to not only manage the current crisis, revive the economy, but to transform the economy and to increase India's global position. First, let me just mention two government officials, how they have described Atmanirbhar Bharat and Be Vocal for Local. First is Sanjeev Sanyal. Sanjeev Sanyal is an economist with the Ministry of Finance. He traces this to Vivekanand, to Swami Vivekanand. He says that Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan is about leveraging and enhancing resilience, internal strength, personal responsibility, and a sense of national mission. So you can see how behavioral aspects, attitude aspects, others are also included in this. Second is Amitabh Kant, who is with NITI, CEO of NITI Aayog. Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan is not anti-globalization. It is about making India self-confident, which is what we have been lacking because of our history, which we are beginning to regain. And we need to gain that even more to take on global competition. It is about India's socio-economic transformation. So we are no longer talking about the discredited import substitution, small industries. It looks so silly now that we would protect small industry, not allow them to have economies of scale and keep them small. So MSME, the redefinition allows now MSME to dream to be big. dream to keep on growing to allow the economies of scale. India is globally very integrated. Very quick data. Global trade is 45% of GDP. FDI stock is 640 billion as of September 2019. It's going to approach 1 trillion USD. Okay, so 1 trillion USD FDI, that will be too small. We need to go further. FPI, portfolio investment, USD 440 billion in January 2020. There are 9,789 FPIs on May 1st registered. 200 are waiting in line. The foreign exchange reserves are 493 billion in May. Largest recipient of inward remittance flows since 2005. Global norms and institutions now we are following and attracting. A very big one is International Solar Alliance, which is next door to Sonepat in Gurugram, our same state of Haryana. And there is going to be one sun, one world, one grid initiative that's being developed with proposals have already been invited, and this will be done with global partnership. So India is not trying to be shirking its global responsibility. It's not looking inward. It is looking outward, but in a self-confident way that it was not before. Behavioral change with the be vocal for local is extremely important. Now, let me, since COVID-19 is there, I'll give you one example of how we are ignoring local for foreign in the performance in coping with the crisis, with COVID-19. There is a lot more talk in Indian media, others, that New Zealand has done very well in managing COVID. It has. But what is not recognized is that Bangalore has done better. But Bangalore as a city is not conscious there. It's a local, and we are not vocal for our local experience. I'll give you data. Population of New Zealand is 5 million. Total cases 1150. Casualties are 23. Bangalore population 12.5 million. Total cases 450. Casualties 13. Who is doing better? How much is Bangalore in the consciousness of us? And this applies to many of our products that we are that we need to ensure that we encourage them. Amul has become a brand, and the ISRO has become a brand. But again, we talk. A lot of our people, and particularly media and the elites and the academics, many of them, know more about NASA than they know about ISRO. If you ask them NASA head, they will know. If you ask them ISRO head, they will know. Okay, so that behavioral, attitudinal change, being proud of our ancient civilization and its wisdom is critical for India to emerge stronger from this. Now, this Atmanirbhar Bharat and the be vocal for local they are to be applied to the 5 pillars of the economy. They are 5 pillars rather. One is economy, infrastructure, technology-driven systems and structures, favorable demographics, and environmental and external imbalances. And demand. Final is demand. And I've already explained the demand. So what these two concepts in economics, basic principles of economics are not very difficult. What is difficult is knowing which combination of these concepts and what sequencing to do for a specific context-specific challenge or issue. And this is what the challenge is going to be, how to apply these two to the variety of context that India finds itself in. The Atmanirbhar concept and the BVFL. I won't give too many examples, but let me just mention a couple and then we can discuss, we can have conversation, mutual conversation. First is, you have been reading about Reliance Jio attracting something like 10 to 12 billion US dollars. Its market cap is 120 billion. And it is partnering with global companies to become a major player in the space. We have many Kirana stores, 60 million Kirana stores. If we were to link them and Reliance Jio becomes part of it, what will be a transformative initiative will that be? The second is that we have Adani Group. The Adani Group has just won a 45,000 crore, so 450 billion rupees project for solar equipment manufacturing. So what they are planning to do is within 3 to 5 years, they are going to create technology that will reduce the reliance on China quite significantly for these equipments. So notice that, China, it is good to have ambition. States have set up task forces, Karnataka, UP, others, to get the inward investments from China and elsewhere, partner with Japan, South Korea, and others to get some of the investment as well. All that is fine. But what we need to do is to develop these kind of capacities and the scale. And the companies, champions, as are called globally, who have got the confidence to go out internationally, create joint ventures, create technology partnerships, adapt it to India, bring it here, and to have it make in India for the world. Okay, so that's the sort of Atmanirbhar Bharat and the BVFL. That is the goal, and that is a very positive, constructive goal towards which we should all be working. I've got a lot of other examples, but I think I've given you a broad flavor of what I see. And to repeat, macro and micro are separated only for filing purposes. They are inseparable. Macro policies create micro impacts. Micro policies have macro impacts. And the monetary policies have fiscal impacts, and fiscal policies have monetary impacts. So don't try to over compartmentalize. Try to think of an event and try to do that. Think of a process and to think through how to do things in a context specific way. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Professor Ashar. That covered a lot of ground, linking different issues. Now I'll request my colleague Kisley to take over the floor for the discussions.
Thank you, Professor Ashar. This was a very enlightening discussion. I think the best thing about getting an understanding from a person like you is like most of the questions and topics are covered, which you have in mind before. But we would still want to dwell upon some of the topics which you covered and which we think are of importance here. So the first question which I want to ask is could you give your insight about the major developments in Modi era 1 and Modi era 2? Like if I'm talking about demonetization, GST, RERA, and insolvency bankruptcy code. So how they have factored in the development as well as if we can say the slowdown of the economy. So how do you see, what is your feedback about those reforms?
You are asking a huge question about
Just
Modi 1, Modi 2, all those policies. But I'm going to give you in this case a somewhat general answer, and then you can ask specifically if you have. Okay, let me give a general answer. When PM Modi was entrusted with the responsibilities of governance in 2014, the critical issue at that time was plumbing. Things were not getting, the money was being released and it was not reaching. The expenditure management was very poor. So we were not getting, we were spending but not getting the outcome. True in education, healthcare, in terms of our subsidies and so on. So he concentrated on plumbing about how to get the money in the hands of the people and how to get the outcome and citizen-centricness into our government policies. So this is where the lot of initiatives of Jandan, Ujwala, and others, and the infrastructure and the blue economy, which I haven't talked about, that India has a vast coastline, but it has never really thought of using inland waterways or the oceans for economic gain and for strategic advantage. So the blue economy, and I've done a paper on that, has been done in these years to try to advance that. Then there was a psychological thing. We all talk about Ganga Mata, but we did not care for its cleanliness and for using Ganga Mata in the way it should be revered. Same thing with cows, others, and so on. So that psychological thing was very important, okay? So when he did that, the plumbing implementation was really the key. Then came some of the major departures recently from the past in the political arena, which was the Article 370, the Ram Mandir, and others. Now, PM team is focusing on major structural reforms. Could you have thought 10 years ago that there will be talk of LIC being listed on the stock exchange? So now we are talking about major changes. Could you have brought about competition in the banking sector and say there will be only 4 banks, others, they will be merged, private sector will be allowed? This is a good thing because politically it is easier to try to say that the more players will come in and then there will be, you are forced to compete. Now, if you are the only one in the place, like in 97, we had only one life insurance company for a billion people. Most of the 90s, I was fortunate enough to participate in the debates about the insurance sector reform. And once I asked the LIC chairman, "Aap kab list kar rahe ho? When are you listing?" So he laughed and he said, "Hum ready hai, we are ready, whenever we are told." So it's a political decision. When the competition comes, we will have to do better. So that competition came. We still have too few life insurance and non-life insurance companies. We need more. So now what we are going for is in areas of the long neglected DISCOM reform, the long neglected one nation, one ration card, which we need. For that, we need CAA and the census as well. So as soon as we can do that, the better. And we are going to go into the different areas. GST, the kind of tax system on consumption we had was bizarre. Even if you were thinking in a novel, you wouldn't think up of such a bizarre system. But GST took a lot of consensus, lot of give and take. I was working with Haryana CM at that time, and Haryana CM once asked me, said, "We are a manufacturing state, humko ye hoga, wo hoga." I said, "Please don't think that way. For the first time, the state is getting 50% of GSDP to tax the services. And you are talking about these minor things about manufacturing state, non-manufacturing. What you should do is to prepare, or what Haryana should do, is to prepare the state to implement GST as best as we can so that we capture the base and the revenue." And it's proven right now, because of the COVID-19, the low rate and so the low rate, growth rate, yes, the GST is suffering. But today's paper says that the e-way bills, which are necessary for GST, in the first 7 days of June, were at 80% of the pre-lockdown period. So we are getting back. We will get back. And GST was a major national reform, which was not done for decades. Okay? And because there are a lot of vested interests. So so a lot of reforms have been, a lot are to be done because we didn't do too much for such a long time. And to break up distributional coalitions, political economy is difficult. We have to realize that policymakers like PM and others cannot move faster than the followers are ready, than the public is ready. You have to create, there could be premature Big Bang reforms. So people who sit down and write columns and give advice, they have not governed. They have not made policy decisions. Or when they governed, they didn't have any guts to include what or to initiate the reforms they are suggesting now. So we need to trust the leadership. And that trust in leadership is a big, big factor that's going to impact in the future. Okay. IBC, we are doing it. We never had a bankruptcy law. There are newspaper reports, I hope true, that Mr. Malaya may be brought back. I hope that is true. And so we are making progress in spite of many challenges and in spite of some section of the population not wholly behind the kind of initiatives that we see. Okay, there's a general answer, but you can be specific. Otherwise, I can speak 2 hours on GST, and that won't serve the purpose.
Definitely, Professor. So before, I have some questions from ex-banker friends of mine, and they asked me, how do you see the monetary transmission this time when the banks are already stressed, and the last reverse repo account showed that the deposits are again moving on to RBI reverse repo account. So the transmission has been quite low. Since PM Modi is banking upon banks for his structural reforms a lot, and we saw a lot of transmission operations going around from February to till this time. How do you see that, and what as an entrepreneur, as an economist, how can you actually give confidence to banking sector if you want to, like if you can?
Yes, the transmission has been a problem. Whenever RBI has reduced rates, repo rates, the lot of it has not been passed on. There are pressures. Today, FM has said that please loan to the MSMEs without any fear. And the government has done as much as they can, but we need to understand that under nationalized banking culture, credit assessment was not emphasized. And that profession of credit assessment, in case of insurance companies, the actuaries, many of them have left. And we now need to, they are doing all the moral suasion, but the, 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 uh, the government can make these facilities available, but it is up to the borrowers and in this case, the MSMEs and the banking sector to try to put them into effect. What I expect is that once the demand, once some of the excess capacity gets utilized. Before, what happened, a lot of capacity got created in the wrong areas, and once we have gone through that cycle, we will see the demand for loans being revived. And while in the meantime, the banking reforms and so on, some of which have happened, that would bring about the greater appetite for risk-taking by the banking officials as well as by the businesses. But there is no simple answer to that. But the FM has been emphasizing that we must, that bankers should not fear.
Thanks a lot, Professor, for that. So,
Yes.
on what would be your advisable criteria for defining MSME? Are you satisfied with the new criteria which it has been defined with? And like what your research and your learning says about that? And what are the best practices of the collaborative management? Or like what can we learn from other countries like Germany and other countries who have made strides in MSMEs? How can we learn from that to improve upon this sector?
SMSEs are not my specialized area. So I cannot say about the other countries, but the kind of problems we have, I worked with the Indonesian government as consultant, and I know in Indonesia, the issues are very similar. And we should not really think that all the onus is on the bankers and all the MSMEs are, are credit worthy and will repay. So that assessment, that professionalism that had to come at that level is what we are trying to develop. And that is going to take time. The definition is a good thing because the earlier definition was too restrictive. You can't do anything without scale, and technology requires scale. So there was one article that was given that says the bankers, CAs, and the MSMEs should get together, assess, and then try to develop a course of action about the revival. But some MSMEs are doing quite well through their association. Chemists in Mumbai, for example, they are procuring it together. And so now we need to have some onus on the MSMEs as well, and not in everything rely on government solving their problem. This has been one of the sort of anomalies where people will deride government interference while advocating more and more government interference in that. We have to create an environment. Yes, the facilities are there, and equity infusion is there. 100% credit guarantees are there. The the enterprises are getting a lot of loans. Now, if you're not going to do that in that kind of an environment with 100% credit guarantee, then I think, we are going to have to see some reorganizations. So businesses, which is fine.
Yeah, definitely, Professor. We have to also take a lead in that. So bonds are a very good source of getting funding from the market. Generally, in a country like India, they can be explored because they haven't been explored much. So how do you see the sovereign rating scenario in the context of developing the bond markets in India?
Yes, I think the bond market in India is underdeveloped. I sit on the board of Aditya Birla Asset Sun Life, Aditya Birla Sun Life Asset Management Company in Singapore. It's on the Singapore board. Our job is to collect funds and funnel it to India. So the Aditya Birla India can invest in India. So I get a lot of conversations about the bond markets, about others. Our government bond markets have been deep, but we need the corporate bond market above all, and also the municipal bond markets, which have been meager for and which we need for developing the urban finance. Is one of the avenues for urban finance. The bond markets, there is now recognition of developing the bond market. A lot of relaxations have happened as to what the FPIs, what's the limit to which they can invest in the government and corporate bond markets. A lot of conditions are being relaxed as well. We need to develop the GIFT City, the India International Financial Center within India, to try to see that we can do more experimentation, and we can also get the foreign players to participate within India in India's both government, sovereign and corporate and municipal bond market. I see that as a next area of, of growth. But we need to, in bond markets, you have to be very specific as to what the tax arrangements and others are for a specific type of bond, what the market structuring of the bonds is, and so on. And this is an area where we have not been as agile and not as flexible as is needed to compete with our comparators, which could include Singapore and Luxembourg, Dubai, and others. So we now need to tie in our corporate bond market with the developing international financial center in the GIFT City, which is an excellent infrastructure, but it needs a new push. Somebody had asked about sovereign credit rating. Sovereign credit rating over time have lost their punch, if I may say so. At one time, I mean, for us, yes, there was a recent negative change in our credit rating, but after that, a lot of FPI money came in. We have nearly 500 billion in foreign exchange reserves. We have FDIs coming in. And while we don't need to worry about the credit rating companies as such, we do need to worry about our current account deficit, which this year is likely to be in surplus or a very small deficit, and we should try to keep it at a minimum. And we need to worry about fiscal deficits and the debt levels. So if we manage our macroeconomy right, then, and with our growth prospects, the credit ratings will come and go, and we won't be affected very much. This is not a statement of arrogance. It is a statement of fact with caution that we must have good policies ourselves. So macroprudential policies, responsibilities on us. We need to follow that, not too preoccupied whether S&P does that or Fitch does that, and so on. They don't have the kind of credibility, the kind of punch with the investors and others as they used to have before.
Definitely, Professor. So one coming question with that, do you see that Modi government has been a very fiscally prudent government in that sense? Like it has been chasing around the FRBM 3%, like fiscal deficit range of 3%. The inflation has also kept, I mean, nearly kept nearly below 4%. So that actually has smoothened the yield curve quite a lot from 2017 or 2017 or 18. So do you see that that policy would work for the sovereign rating to go high in the longer run, or do we also need to take some extra measures in that?
Couple of points. Today's paper suggests that India's fiscal deficit may be around 5.5% GDP. So yes, we are trying to follow FRBM, but with some flexibility. And the states have been given flexibility up to 5% if they want to go there. States should take responsibility. If they want to borrow more, borrow, but be willing to pay. Don't few years later come back and say state center must pay. Secondly, we have ongoing 15th Finance Commission. They are deliberating. They are going to give that report by end of the year. We have to wait and see as to what they are recommending about FRBM, about the others, and then tend to react. As I said, I wouldn't do FRBM and other changes and their management just for the ranking sake. Okay? Rankings are not within limits that critical for us. Okay? We have got inherent strengths which will survive. But we have to see what our economy needs for macro management and for macro prudential and financial stability. And we have to act accordingly. So I'm looking forward to the Finance Commission, 15 Finance Commission's report and the kind of recommendations which they make on this and for the states.
Definitely, Professor. So before we conclude, there's a last question. So India is actually always had a healthy competition with China, and that has increased post-COVID. We want to be at the supply chain. We aspire to be at the supply chain, have the supply chain importance which China had. So considering that, and considering our status of the FTAs which we are having right now, the unconcluded FTAs and other things in that, and also since we do have some structural, we do have some political problems in opening our market for dairy markets as well as agricultural market. How do you see the political will of the government to go forward in actually opening up the market or having those FTAs concluded so we can have a right position in the global supply chain?
Thank you. Again, this is a very, very complex question. Our mindset should not be thinking that we will go back to the pre-COVID-19 globalization characteristics. RCEP, the kind of free trade agreements and so on, which are not really free trade, they were preferential trade agreements. So what we need to do is the idea of the Atmanirbhar Bharat is that we need to develop capacities ourselves. We open up or we collaborate and integrate with the global economy, but we also ensure that where we have certain critical national interest, such as in dairy agricultural sector, that we are not squeamish about trying to protect our industry, not in a negative way, but to become even more competitive. Today, Amul is $1 billion company. You can buy their products everywhere. But why do we have one Amul? Mother Dairy, we need others. We need a lot more. This is what we are trying to do. Agricultural exports, we are trying to double from 40 to $80 billion. And there are, along the corridors, the freight corridor, Delhi-Mumbai freight corridor, others, there will be agricultural areas and the food processing, value addition, others that will increase our interaction with the global economy. If you have read, UP government is setting up herbal plants along an 800-kilometer corridor. Now, what kind of revenue we can earn if we manage it right? So it is not just like before saying, oh, agriculture is important and so on. We can't have 50% of the population having 17% of GDP and have them become prosperous. So we now have to have blue economy, horticulture, others, and so on, all combined with agriculture and the processing and the value added. And this is what we are trying to do. But we need that time. So we shouldn't be pressurized. And I'm glad we are not being pressurized for ourselves, but we are not accepting. We are being pressurized, but we are not accepting that pressure from our CAP and others. But key is we need to keep on developing our own capacities. We have to have a criticality to the world. We can have that criticality in agriculture, in medicines, pharmacy, and in space and other areas. And if we can develop those 5, 6 criticalities, we will develop the kind of alignments with the like-minded countries that will let us integrate with the world in a more substantial and sustainable manner.
Definitely. I think it has covered all the points. I think all the doubts in our mind have been settled for now, and we do have we have an increased confidence for the government, and the decisions we are taking will be watching over that. Sahil, over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Asher. It was a very engaging discussion. I saw that we couldn't cover many of the questions that came in the chat because of lack of time. But I would like to inform the participants and request them to check out the programs on Rashtram's website and the public policy program for executives that we have, which will take you further deep into many of these areas. I request our Dean and co-founder Shobhit Mathur to present a vote of thanks and conclude the webinar.
Thank you, Sahil. Thank you, Professor Asher. I know it's very late where you are. It's about 10:30 p.m. there now in Singapore. You covered a range of topics. You brought in your entire experience through decades of international experience, as well as working with the Haryana government, various corporates in the 90 minutes you had. And in a typical professor style, you not just covered the topic which was asked to you, but as well you extrapolated it and gave a lesson to each of us. I know there are a lot of questions unanswered. We hope to be having a lot of future sessions with you, and the learners at Rashtram will definitely benefit a lot from you. Thank you, sir, and thanks to all the speakers who have been through this 90 minutes of session, and hopefully we'll engage more with you in the future. Thank you. Bye. Good night.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Goodbye.